The phone rang twice before I realized my hands were shaking. Celeste's name glowed on the screen in friendly blue letters. I had the stupid habit of imagining people's voices the way they used to be. Bright, warm, the sound of someone who could still be surprised by the goodness left in the world. When I saw her name, a small, steady part of me relaxed. We were supposed to be in Hawaii in less than a month. I had the shirts folded on my couch, price tags still looped through the collars. I had read the guidebook until my eyes ached and bookmarked every picture of sunrise over Haleakala, every photograph of lava-black beaches, every postcard-perfect shot of a luau. I'd been saving for this for months, not because I had to, but because I wanted it to be perfect. Because the idea of three of us, together in the same place without obligations or interruptions, felt like the closest thing to a reconciliation I'd allowed myself since retirement. When I swiped to answer, Celeste's voice came through like a careful curtain being drawn. There was none of her usual laughter. It had the professional, measured cadence she used when handling unhappy clients at the marketing firm. That attention to tone was something I admired in her. She could make a difficult truth sound manageable. But she used it now for this. "Dad," she said, "I'm really sorry. We can't do Hawaii." And the words landed on my chest like a dropped plate. For a second, I didn't process them, because my brain was busy with the image of the shirts and the sticky notes in the guidebook and the feeling of sunscreen between my fingers when I had tried it on my forearm at the pharmacy. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet of my living room. "Trouble at Stewart's company. They're downsizing. There's a chance he could lose his job." The words came out steady, rehearsed. She had the way of people who tried to spare the other person the full force of a fault. "We can't afford it right now. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know how much you were looking forward to it. It'll have to wait." I remember the sun that afternoon. It came through the window in a lazy, warm slice and painted the coffee table orange. I remember the way my hands found a shirt on the couch, the soft cloth between my fingers, the small shimmering tag offering my faith. We said goodbye with the usual small protocol and hung up. I walked to the window and watched the neighbor's garage door close a row down the street, and in the silence that followed, I felt something inside me shift. It was not only disappointment, it was a suspicion that lodged and refused to leave. Ben's Egyptians had been different. Celeste's voice had been bright with plans, the kind of brightness that made a father think the world still had room for small, silly joys. "Dad," she'd said on the first call, practically vibrating with excitement, "what if we did Hawaii together? End of March, just you, me, and Stuart. Real family time." There had been such hope there. I'd felt something in my chest ease, like pressure released from an old bruise. For the first time since retirement, something felt like it wasn't purely routine. I'd wanted it so badly that I let myself believe. Sexually. So I had booked the snorkeling tour the moment she mentioned Makini Crater. The company's site had glowing reviews, a clear cancellation policy, and a confirmation email that landed in my inbox like an actual event I could touch. I'd driven to the barber, had my hair cut the way I used to when I still met clients. Conservative on the sides, neat on top. I'd gone to CVS for sunscreen and picked SPF 50 because I wanted my skin to look like a man who cared for himself. I'd stood at the department store rack and picked out the Hawaiian shirts with the care of a man, buying one last thing to prove he was still part of the world he'd built. I returned 2 days later with the shirt in a shopping bag, the receipt folded like a small paper flag, and the tour cancellation queued up in my email drafts. I called the tour company, dutifully clicked through 3 "Are you sure?" confirmation screens, and hit cancel. I requested a refund, which the site said would take 7 to 10 business days. That was how reality had been that week. Measured, careful, boxed like something fragile you put in the closet. It seemed reasonable to give them space. When someone is in the middle of a crisis at work, business owner or not, they become inward-facing by necessity. I left calls and texts sparse and short. "Thinking of you," I would write, and then I would mean it and nothing more. The texts on my end were always short and soft, because Facebook felt like an attic that people used to store their carefully curated selves. I typed Celeste's name into the search bar, Rationalized to myself that maybe I would find a reassuring status update, maybe a post about how stressed they were but hopeful. What I found instead was a picture. She was standing under a bright Hawaiian sun, a lei around her neck, eyes half closed in a laugh that looked like it cost nothing. Stuart had his arm around her, grinning like a man who had just won a small, warm prize. Beside them, his parents, the in-laws who'd always been a little too polished for my taste, wore matching straw hats and smiles like stage props. The sand was white enough to hurt. In the background, palms swayed and the ocean winked. Shameful, read. Family parade action, read. Family paradise in Maui. Grateful for every moment. And the timestamp was the same week. There were photos of them snorkeling in corals, posed on a boardwalk with shaved ice in hand, his mother holding up a coconut with a tiny umbrella and ecstatic gleam. People liked the photos, left hearts, so beautiful, comments, and the metric I hate most on social media, the casual obliviousness of people who choose visibility over a private reality. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. There had been no post about financial trouble. There had been no post about budget concerns. There had been no hint of the pain that might make the trip impossible. Instead, there was the bright, giddy evidence of a trip they had taken in the same week. For a long time after that, I sat like a statue in my living room with the laptop still open, as if closing it could separate me from the truth. The Hawaiian shirts on the couch suddenly felt like theatrical costuming that had been prepared for an audience that now excluded me. A slow, cold anger rose, not sharp enough to leap out at the moment, but insidious enough to settle under my ribs. In the days that followed, I did what any reasonable man would do when he felt betrayed by someone he loved. I kept my distance. I didn't call. I didn't text. I let the silence be what it was. There was a strange satisfaction in being absent while the evidence of the lie was still warm online. But time demands something else. Not justice, not even retribution, simply explanation. Help. Stuart's in real trouble. He made some bad investments and we don't know what to do. We could lose the house. Crimson. The words were different from the practiced rehearsal I had heard that first day. There was fear now, moist and unlovely. It pushed on a particular part of me that still retained an old-fashioned response. When someone asks, you try to help. It's a reflex as old as being human. How much? I asked before I could think to measure myself. She told me the number, and I remember the sound of it clanging into the inside of my skull, as if the amount itself could be a tool. $100,000. A lot of money, more than anyone should ever have to hand over in an afternoon. The number has a way of doing two things. It clarifies and it magnifies. I thought of the way 100,000 could buy time, how it could stand between a family and cold floors, between despair and an opportunity to set things right. Dad, Celeste said, we don't know where else to go. Stuart said he would handle everything. I don't know how this happened. I'm so sorry I hadn't told you earlier. I listened, and I told myself I would be sensible. I would be the father who helps. So I said the words fathers say. Come over, bring paperwork. We'll look at it. We'll talk this through. There was relief in her voice like a tide pulling back. She thanked me and hung up with an efficiency that felt almost practiced. I did not sleep that night. Not because of the money, but because of the treachery that propelled it. That first photo of Hawaii replayed behind my eyelids like a film of something undeniable. A lie had been told to make a private paradise possible. If it was true that they had lied to me so they could take a week in the sand without telling me, what did they think would happen when they asked for 100,000? Did they imagine the same easy compliance they'd had before? Did they imagine that the betrayal would be simple to fix with a check? I prepared as if I were going to keep a promise. The house itself felt like a vow. I wanted it steady and comfortable. I reheated coffee, tied my tie even though I didn't need to go anywhere, and waited for their arrival. Time from the moment you make a decision to when the world responds can feel slow as molasses. He didn't meet my eyes. His mother hovered behind them like a shadow of complicity. They sat down at my kitchen table like they were entering some ritual. I could hear the quiet shuffle of papers as Celeste pulled out documents and a printed spreadsheet with bold red columns. She began to explain, and as she did, I could feel the old tug, the one that wants to rush to the rescue, to smooth the edges of pain for the people you love. She spoke of investments gone sour, of risk miscalculated, of a cascade of small decisions that had become a chasm overnight. She said it well, and for someone unacquainted with the social media record and the very recent paradise on their phones, the story would have been convincing. Overwatch her as she talked. I watched the way her hand trembled when she pushed the papers toward me. I watched the way she looked at me when she said the words, "We need 100,000, as if my face would be a cat's cradle of compassion. And in that moment, something inside that is older than rage took voice. A teacher, an archivist, the kind of weary elder who knew the value of lessons passed on rather than favors granted. When she finished, I reached for the envelope on the table and slid it toward her. Her eyes widened. Relief flared across her face like a match. "This should hold you for now," I said, my voice small and steady. She hesitated, fingers reaching for it like someone who expected gold. I could have handed over the check. I could have written the number, called my bank and executed an immediate wire. I could have dissolved the hurt by pouring money into the fissure. That was the easy route, the one most people expected fathers to take. But I had learned in the last month that some lessons do not stick if smoothed over with cash. "Open it," I said. She tore the flap and peered in. Then her face went through an impossible sequence. Confusion, then recognition, then an ashen pallor. Her hand slapped over her mouth and she slid back in the chair as if struck. The envelope wasn't full of bills. It was full of paper. A stack of printed Facebook screenshots, time-stamped and highlighted. Every vacation photo, every smiling caption, every family paradise moment laid out like exhibits on a table. Underneath the photos was a legal notice. The first page of a deed directive screamed for a moment, a high, reedy sound that made the cat bolt from under the table and land on the staircase like a small, indignant comet. When Celeste came to, her eyes were glassy and embarrassed. She looked at me like a child caught putting their hand in a cookie jar. The thing I had given her had not been punishment for a moment. It had been a mirror. "What did you?" she whispered. I sat down across from her, and for once, in years, I did not pretend that we both had the same rights to a soft landing. "I went on Facebook," I said simply. "I saw the photos. The sounds of sand and laughter don't mean less because it was posted publicly. You lied to your father." Her face crumpled like thin paper. She reached for me, words tumbling out in a messy apology that sounded less like contrition and more like begging. "I'm sorry, Dad. We didn't want to worry you. We thought we could fix it before we asked. We never meant to hurt you. Please, we'll pay you back." You can't unscramble certain eggs. You can apologize until the apology wears thin, like a coin rubbed smooth in the pocket. I watched her try to find footing in the mess she and Stuart had made. Around us, the kitchen hummed with an ordinary patience. The fridge's low thrumming, the clock ticking, the sunlight moving its hand across the floor. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me," I said, and in my voice I felt the age of the lessons I'd learned. "But hiding things is a kind of decision, too. You decided to be present in paradise without me. You decided not to tell the truth, and then asked for the thing you'd taken. That's not something you fix with words alone." She began to cry then, and the sincerity in the tears, I do not doubt it, was real in its way. But apologies are not always the thing that repairs what's been broken. Repair takes time, and sometimes repair requires accountability. Disregard, later after they left, after the house returned to its natural, quiet hum, I sat in the chair by the window and looked at the empty space where the shirts had been. The sunlight had retreated into late afternoon gold. The guidebook lay open on the coffee table face down, like a book abandoned mid-sentence. From me. I dreamed of lees and white sand and woke with the taste of salt and something sour on my tongue. In the morning I walked to the mailbox, and there was nothing there but the usual array. A credit card offer with glossy colors, a church newsletter, and a small plain envelope that had been returned. I let it sit on the table for a long time. After they left that afternoon, my house felt like a stage that had suddenly been cleared. Cups in the kitchen sink, a pair of reading glasses on the end table, the small, ordinary props of a life that went on, whether or not anyone else noticed. I walked through the rooms as if I were learning the layout all over again. The shirts were gone from the couch. The guidebook lay face down where I had dropped it. The cat padded around my ankles, ignorant of the human drama that had unfolded at the kitchen table. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere down the street and, somewhere else, a child called for a dog. Life kept making its noise. My hands shook for a long time after Celeste fainted. I'd never seen her like that in all the years of her childhood. Collapsed, fragile, genuinely undone. I had rushed to her in a different life, a father who bandaged, scraped knees, and reprimanded bad choices with a lecture that ended in ice cream. That part of me still existed. It had simply learned that bandages could hide a deeper rot. I did not call her that night. I could have. I could have filled an envelope with cash and given it to her and pretended that nothing had happened. I did not. Instead, I sat at my table and made lists. Lists have always steadied me. There were the names of the assets, the parcels of property, the little rental on Oak Avenue that had paid for my early retirements, the accounts that hummed in their boring security. I wrote down dates and numbers. I made notes about statutes and about contacts. There is a kind of love that hides in paperwork, the careful tending of things so they continue to function when a human heart fails. My father had left me instructions one day in a brisk, business-like voice. Keep it clean, keep it clear. Don't let strangers run through the house. So I started by calling my attorney. Millionaire wasn't young. He smelled faintly of peppermint and old books, the way of men who never stopped loving the law. You can take steps. Freeze distributions. Change trustees if you have the right powers. You can put conditions on access. The law gives you levers. I felt oddly relieved, as if I'd been handed a map after wandering in a fog. Exemption, I want accountability, I said. The words surprised me. They had a sharper edge than I thought. Not vengeance, not humiliation, but accountability. If what happened is true, if they took a trip and lied, then there has to be a cost that teaches something more than forgiveness by default. Henry made a note and didn't smile. We'll be careful. And discreet. The more drama this becomes publicly, the messier everything gets. He was right about that. Public spectacles are like oil on quicksand. They make an already bad situation slip faster. But I also wanted the truth to matter. It felt important that Celeste understand the gravity of the choice she had made. Not telling someone who loved you that you were leaving them out of a moment you had promised to share. Over the next week, I turned the house into something that had purpose beyond the ordinary rhythms of retirement. I walked my neighborhood with a patrician's solemnity. I went to the bank and made small withdrawals and small deposits. I read the trust documents again and again until the legal language started to look like a second language I could speak. At odd hours, I found myself opening my laptop and scrolling through Celeste's public life. Dates of trips, check-ins, the comments people left on photos like little endorsements of a life curated for appearances. Each little image was a tile in a mosaic of choices that had been made without me. There was something corrosive about seeing those images after I'd been told they were not possible. My anger was not the heat of a moment. It was the long, slow burn of feeling replaced. As a father, you become used to being the background of someone else's life. Your children meet friends and spouses, and new loyalties form. That is natural. But there is a line between moving aside and being lied to so that you will step aside. That was the line I had felt my foot cross. Word travels in small towns and in cul-de-sacs. Weeks after Celeste's visit, unofficial news started to arrive at my mailbox. A neighbor I'd helped move a refrigerator stopped by to ask about a charity event I ran last year, and, with the cash, somehow involved the very luxuries they'd claimed they could no longer afford. Stuart's comments were laconic and proud, his mother's likes numerous. I did not reply. I watched as the distance between our realities expanded like the tide after a storm. Several days after the fainting incident, a letter arrived from Celeste. It was the kind of letter that tried to be both formal and intimate, apologies sprinkled with explanations. She said they had been embarrassed to tell me about the vacation because they had wanted to make me happy and had been afraid of my disappointment if the trip wasn't perfect. She claimed that the trip to Maui had been a spontaneous family visit arranged by Stuart's parents, a gift they could not refuse. Her words were apologetic and careful, the same tone she used on the phone the first day she told me about the company downsizing. I read it twice, and then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Merc apology. Apologies are useful, but because it omitted the plain fact that they had chosen to exclude me from a plan we had discussed together. It made them the victims of a good deed, an easy way to return the moral bar to where it had been before. There was no ownership, only explanation. For a while I toyed with confrontation. I considered going to Stuart's parents' house and walking right up to them with a printed stack of the Facebook posts and demanding an explanation. The fantasy was delicious in the abstract. I could see their faces flush, their polite smiles wilt. But fantasies are not decisions. They are the body's way of playing at power. I did not want drama. I wanted clarity. Instead, I started to quietly build a framework that would enforce a new reality. I reached out to a few people I trusted. Henry, the lawyer, Marjorie, who had been our accountant since before I retired, and Luis, the manager of the family trust I'd established years ago. Each conversation was a study in restraint. I explained what had happened, not with fury but with documentation, printouts of posts, dates, times. I asked them not to act rashly but to explore possibilities. Henry suggested drafting an amendment to the trust that would define distributions differently and create an oversight committee for large, sudden withdrawals. Marjorie suggested safeguards for account access and additional reporting for large expenditures. Nightstand, a string of careful thank you notes she insisted on writing after birthdays and parties. There had been a time when she would have come and told me the truth and shown me the photos and said, "Dad, I'm sorry, we made a mistake." She had never been a liar by nature. This prevarication was inconsistent with the child I remembered. That made it worse. It suggested either a fracture in character or a rationalization that had grown like mold and spread. Crimson, SHTM. One evening, a week after the letter, I received a phone call from an unexpected place. Stuart. He sounded tired in a way men do when the world wears down on them. He asked if we could meet, said there were details he left out when they had visited. I agreed, masking my wariness with the practiced face of a father willing to listen. We met at a small diner halfway between our houses, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that tasted of burnt sugar. He arrived with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. Stuart talked. He told me about investments that had gone wrong, about a friend who'd recommended a broker, about a trust he'd been convinced would secure their future. He narrated risks, numbers, and missed phone calls like a man trying to make himself believable to someone he hoped would still be a safety net. For a moment, my old instinct, to lean in and fix the broken thing, surged up like a tide. I could have written a check there, in the diner, while he folded his napkin apologetically and scuffed his shoe. But I kept my hands folded and listened. Imprisonment. "I didn't think about how it would look," he said finally. "I should have told you. We didn't mean to exclude you, Mr. Avery. It was badly thought out. We panicked about the investments and the timing of the trip was terrible. I'm sorry." His apology had the ring of someone who had rehearsed it. Still, there was weariness behind his eyes that felt like a human confession. I asked him about specifics, timelines, amounts, who had known. He answered in halting detail, unwilling to place blame anywhere but in himself. I could see he was trying to be man enough to bear the cost of his choices. "What do you want from me?" I asked bluntly. It was a question no one else had asked in the weeks leading up to it. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were speaking the same language. Back home, I continued with measures Henry and Marjorie suggested. I drafted a letter which Henry would send under my signature, a formal notice that the trust's distributions would be subject to review and that any requests exceeding a certain amount would need to meet documented criteria. There was legal cover for everything. Henry was careful with language that would enforce accountability but not cruelty. The letter was not punitive. It was protective. Trolley called that night. Her voice was raw, as if she had been crying. "Dad, please," she said. "We are trying to be honest now. Stuart knows he was wrong. We'll give you the documents. Please don't shut us out." I could hear the people behind her, murmurs, maybe Stuart and his mother, as if they were participants in this private theater. It was striking how quickly the world had shrunk for them. Their photographs, once wide and panoramic, were now boxed into a system of receipts and spreadsheets. That is what accountability does. It creates boundaries. I agreed to look at the papers. I also told her, sharply and without malice, that there were consequences to choices we make. She accepted the admonition with a sob and a promise to be better. I did not say what I had already set into motion. There are things you do for the future that are too delicate to broadcast in a moment of heated feeling. I had learned to act in ways that would not be undone by a change of heart, mine or anyone else's. Epstein. A week later, Stuart delivered a stack of documents that made a room smell like officialness. Brokerage statements, contract pages, emails printed in black type. The numbers were as ugly as Stuart had said. Risky positions that had bled value, and a line of creditors with patient and not-so-patient letters. The math there was not personal. It was arithmetic and human consequence. It was also clear that there had been choices, and that choices can never be erased. I spent a long night reading those pages under the lamplight, the house quiet except for the subtler music of the world, the refrigerator's motor, the wind against the gutters. I traced patterns that day, forms of human error disguised as optimism. Sometimes people mistake risk for confidence, and that mistake can ruin them. But the fact that they were ruined did not justify the lie that fiduciary review and a waiting period in which alternatives could be found. We created a path for restitution rather than an impenetrable wall. The day before the amendment was to be signed, my neighbor Ronnie stopped by. Everyone knew something had happened in the Avery house. You could smell it like ozone in the air. He expressed concern like someone dropping pebbles into a pond. Careful, considerate. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Avery," he said plainly. "Tough love sometimes is what keeps people honest." I nodded. Ronnie had been in situations where help was given too fast and then squandered. He'd seen families fracture and wished different for me. Was executed with a kind of small solemnity. Henry holding the document, pen poised. Luis asking a few bureaucratic questions about trusteeship logistics. Marjorie making sure the numbers balanced. It was not dramatic. There were no gavel bangs or thunderbolts. It was paperwork, respectable and dull, which in its own way felt merciful. I remember the small flare of satisfaction that comes from a job well done, the satisfying thump of the pen hitting paper, the crispness of official stamps. That night, I slept with a lesser weight on my chest. Temptation has consequences. Quietly shifting the foundation of family finances is not a neutral act. I was not blind to the fact that my choices would bruise people I loved. I also knew that there were risks in not acting, that letting this kind of thing slide would teach the wrong lesson about truth and dignity. I had become the sort of man who preferred a hard lesson to the slow rot that comes from letting deception stand. Celtics texted me an hour after the amendment was signed. Her words were short. "Why?" I did not text back immediately. We had to do this face to face. We had to be honest in a way that text could not carry. She arrived the next day with Stuart and his mother. Their faces had the tight, brittle look of people expecting a verdict. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the envelope had revealed photos and the fainting fit, and I explained calmly what had been done and why. Reaction was a storm in miniature, a combination of outrage, fear, and grief. She accused me of grandstanding. She accused me of punishing. Controlled. I felt something in my chest snap, not anger, but a heart's old splinter being pried out. She left the house with Stuart, slamming the door so hard the cat twitched and looked toward the hallway as if expecting thunder. The neighbors would hear it and some would take sides. That was inevitable. Afterwards, Henry called with practicalities. The amendment would not be instantaneous in effect. The trustees and financial institutions needed notification, and certain processes had to be observed. There would be time, the lawyer said, for appeals and for negotiation. The law, like life, is less decisive than it sometimes appears in stories. I knew that. I also knew I had done what I could without being cruel. The immediate weeks that followed were a blend of awkwardness and ordinary lives trying to rearrange themselves around a new truth. Celeste stopped posting photos of anything remotely luxurious. Their social media went quiet, a deafening kind of silence. Sometimes I wondered whether the silence was penitence or shame or strategy, the human impulse to clean up a feed before the public eye returns. People at the country club were polite but brisk. Those who had once asked about my daughter now skirted the subject. It's a strange thing. The world is full of people who are generous with curiosity, but stingy with compassion. I, meanwhile, felt a complicated mixture of relief and loneliness. There is a grief that comes from acting consistently with one's principles. It is the knowledge that you will be misunderstood by some and admired by others who will never know the whole story. Sometimes I wished the solution had been simpler, that we could have a conversation and everything would be fixed with a handshake and a vow. But human relationships rarely respond well to quick fixes. Unless evening, about 3 weeks after the amendment, my phone rang. It was Celeste again. Before I could decide whether to answer, I heard the small shuffle of a life being rearranged at her end. Muffled voices, someone sobbing. She asked if we could talk. I told her yes. She came over that night without Stuart. She sat opposite me in the living room, folding and unfolding her hands like someone trying to keep from falling apart. The shame on her face had abandoned the theatricality of earlier apologies and now looked like something quieter and more human. She did not ask for the trust to be reversed. Instead, she asked, in a way that made me both ache and feel proud, for a chance. Second acts. It is a stubborn habit of hope. I reached out and took her hand. My palm found the roughness of her knuckles, the place where worry had left tracks. You have to do the work, I said soberly. Rebuilding trust isn't a single transaction. It's a series of choices you make every day that show you mean what you say. I can help you do it, but it will be on terms that make sense. We spoke into the night, not about legal documents, but about mundane specifics. A budget, timelines for repayment, counseling for financial decisions, transparency measures. She agreed to regular meetings with Marjorie, the accountant, to working with a financial counselor, and to providing full documentation of any future significant purchase. She promised to keep the house in order, to call more often, to be present. These were small things, perhaps, in the face of a large fracture, but they were honest. When she left that night, she hugged me with a tenderness that felt like truce rather than surrender. I did not know if this would be the beginning of a new pattern or another temporary patch. But for the first time since the beach photos, I felt a small thaw inside me. Hope returned in the way it always does, not as certainty, but as a willingness to try. In the weeks that followed, they did not immediately recover all that was damaged. There were late payments still to be made, and a long reshuffling. They sold an extra car and reduced dining out. They implemented the budget we created together at my kitchen table. I watched their progress like a man watching a sapling in a windstorm. I could not control the weather, but I could provide a stake and hope the sapling took root. And yet the photos still existed. The images of sun and lays and laughter remained in the digital world, like evidence that a different life had existed simultaneously with their claims of hardship. It is one thing to confess, and another to repair what your actions have created. The world is full of people who apologize and then revert. The world is also full of people who earn forgiveness by consistent behavior. I found myself waiting to see which route my daughter would choose. There was a lesson there, not only for Celeste but for me. The ways we love people are not always simple. You can choose to be a soft giver, immediately resolving crises. But it had changed shape. It was no longer only about a place. It was about whether the people I love could be truthful inside it. The chapter of the beach had closed, at least for now. A new chapter, longer, harder, and perhaps truer, had begun. I did not know its final lines. Nobody does. Life is the slow unfolding of small acts, stitched together into something that sometimes, very rarely, becomes forgiveness. I kept turning pages, not certain whether the story would be tender or tragic, but convinced that honesty would have the last voice. Tightening what will happen next. I do not know how Celeste will recover from what I did, or whether our relationship will be the same because some things, once revealed, become a different kind of truth. But I do know this. The next time heaven comes calling under a palm tree, I will be more careful about who's included in the picture. If paradise requires us to stop telling the truth to the people we love, then maybe it wasn't paradise at all. The morning after Celeste fainted in my kitchen, I found myself standing at the window again, the same spot I'd watched her smile from in old photographs. The desert outside was pale and quiet, the kind of morning where the world feels paused between breaths. The sun hadn't climbed high enough to burn the dew from the neighbor's grass, and a thin fog of sprinkler mist hung over the cul-de-sac like a curtain. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the leftovers of yesterday's confrontation. Her words still echoed in my head. "We didn't want to worry you." Funny how people use that as a blanket to cover deceit. You weren't trying to protect me, you were trying to protect yourself. I'd spent half the night replaying the look on her face when she'd opened the envelope. The shock, the guilt, the collapse. I thought the image would bring me satisfaction, but instead, it left me hollow. There's a difference between justice and closure. Justice is clean, precise, a knife's edge of fairness. Closure is messy. It bleeds. By noon, I had convinced myself that maybe it was over. I had done what I needed to do. She knew the truth now. She knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. Maybe that was enough. But by evening, my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. 12 missed calls. 9 new voicemails. Didn't listen. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the sound of her tears again. Or worse, her excuses. I turned the phone face down and tried to focus on the quiet. The refrigerator hummed like a lullaby. The clock ticked in even rhythm. And outside, the faint sound of a lawnmower drifted in from somewhere down the street. I've learned, doesn't come just because you ask for it. At 7:13 p.m., the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought maybe it was one of the neighbors, or maybe Amazon. But when I opened the door, there she was, Celeste, my daughter, my betrayer. And beside her, holding her elbow like a guard, was Stuart. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. Stuart's were hard and sunken. He didn't look like the smug man from the Hawaii photos anymore. He looked like a cornered dog. She said, voice trembling. "Please, Dad, I know what we did was wrong. I lied to you. We lied to you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." She swallowed hard. "But Stuart, he's made mistakes too. Things got worse after the trip. The company started investigating missing funds. It's bad. He could lose everything." Looking at Stuart, who finally met my eyes. "So, you're here to ask for more money." His jaw tightened. "We're here to ask for help," he corrected. "Legal help. Advice. You were in real estate for 30 years. You know contracts, investments." "I also know integrity," I interrupted. "You might have heard of it." His face darkened, but Celeste grabbed his hand under the table. "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But I'm asking as your daughter, not as some spoiled kid. Please don't let him go to jail." Jail. The word hit harder than I expected. I leaned back, staring between them. "How much are we talking about?" Stuart cleared his throat. "It's complicated." "It always is." Celeste's tears came faster. Stuart's company trusted him with client funds. Temporary holdings until contracts closed. But he moved some of the money into personal accounts. Just to float it, he said. He meant to pay it back before anyone noticed. "How much?" She hesitated, shameful. He didn't. 400,000. The air left the room. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. 400,000. "And you took a vacation to Hawaii in the middle of that?" I asked slowly, my voice low, controlled, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. With my money almost funding your little getaway? Stuart's lips twitched. We needed a break, he muttered. A break, I repeated. From what? The stress of stealing? Dad, please, Celeste said, her voice desperate now. We're not asking you to give us money, just to help us find a way out. Stuart can fix it. We just need time. She studied her, the woman she'd become. The same woman who once wore pigtails and carried a stuffed elephant everywhere. The same girl who used to call me Daddy instead of Dad. And Celeste hissed, grabbing his arm. Stop! But it was too late. The look in his eyes said everything. Rage, fear, shame. The whole cocktail that men like him never learned to manage. I stood too, slowly, quietly. I spent my whole life building them with him, which was lovely manage. This works, which my courage will help fold. I spent my whole life building there, the long which he building, this encouragement also wearing Celeste to a sheer. I stood too, slowly, quietly. This words that she wants manage, the lest is once, takes more through the officer. This was sometimes what she willed. Stop, but it was too late, but it was too late, but it was too late. The look in his eyes said everything. The look in his eyes said very well. The look in his eyes said fixing it all the way that everything stood. The look in his eyes said building. The older his eyes never learned himself. The look in his eyes said sudden. I stood too, slowly, quietly. Stood too, clicking. I spent my whole life building a reputation, I said evenly. Not for wealth, not for applause, for trust. And you two shattered it because you couldn't bear to tell me the truth. Erection's voice broke. Dad, please. You don't understand what pressure. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare tell me about pressure. I worked 3 jobs after your mother died to keep that roof over our heads. I didn't lie. I didn't steal. And I sure as hell didn't fake a financial crisis so I could drink cocktails in Maui. Stuart took a step toward me, fists tight. You think you're better than us? No, I said, just smarter. He flinched, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. But he didn't. He just stood there, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Then he turned and stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the walls trembled. Celeste stayed seated, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know who he is anymore. I wanted to tell her that I did, that I'd seen men like him before. Smooth talkers, shortcut takers. They start with small lies, and before long, they're knee-deep in ruin, dragging everyone around them down for company. Instead, I just sighed. You need to make a choice, Celeste, him or yourself, because one of you might still be saved. Demolished her face, mascara streaked down her cheeks. I can't just leave him. You already left me, I said quietly. Her face broke then, fully, utterly. A sob tore out of her like something physical, raw. She covered her mouth and cried until there was none. Always is. Next morning I drove to the courthouse, old habits die hard, and spoke to a friend who still worked in county records. Over coffee, I learned that Stuart's firm was already under quiet investigation. Someone had tipped them off. The auditors hadn't filed yet, but they were circling. By the time I got home, I knew exactly what I had to do. Celeste called again that afternoon. I can't reach Stuart, she said, panic in her voice. He left last night. His phone's off. His boss called this morning. They know everything. Oh my God, Dad, what do I do? Come over, I said. Bring your laptop. When she arrived, I asked her to sit. She looked fragile, like the scaffolding of her world had been ripped away. Celeste, I said gently, I need you to tell me everything. Every password, every email, every account he used. She hesitated, then nodded. We spent hours combing through her files. Hidden transfers, offshore accounts, dummy corporations. Stuart had been moving money for months, not just company funds, but hers too. He'd borrowed against their mortgage, cashed out her retirement. By sundown, she was shaking. He stole from me? Yes, I said quietly, and he thought you'd never find out. She broke down again, curling into herself like a child. I wanted to hold her, but some part of me still ached too much to reach out. So I did the next best thing. I got to work. That night, I drafted a report, every transaction, every detail, and sent it anonymously to the auditors investigating Stewart. Then, I called my lawyer. We restructured the trust again, this time in a way that would protect Celeste if she cooperated fully with the investigation. If she didn't, she'd lose everything. It was harsh, but necessary. By midnight, she was asleep on my couch, tear-streaked but safe. I covered her with a blanket, turned off the light, and stood there for a long time watching her. The same way I had when she was a baby, fragile, dreaming, unaware that the world was about to shift under her feet. 3 days later, the news broke. Like local marketing executive arrested in $400,000 embezzlement scheme. Stewart's mugshot flashed across every news site. Every dinners, did laundry, fixed the leaky faucet I'd ignored for months. Little things, but each one felt like a piece of something healing. Nim evening, as the Arizona sun bled red across the horizon, she came to me holding an envelope. "I know I can't repay you," she said, "but I sold my jewelry. It's only $10,000, but I want you to have it." I looked at her for a long moment, then pushed it back. "No," I said, "keep it. Start over." Her lip trembled. "Why?" "Because this time, I want you to earn everything the right way." Months passed. The story faded from headlines. Stewart took a plea deal. Celeste rebuilt, slowly, steadily. One evening, she found me sitting in the backyard, looking up at the stars. She sat beside me and said softly, "You know, I still think about Hawaii." "So do I said. "I wish you'd been there." "I was," I replied, looking at her, "just not the way you wanted." Shoreline, a small, honest smile this time. And for the first time since that awful phone call, I felt peace. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about teaching them how to rebuild their own. The next morning, the Arizona sun bled through my blinds like molten gold. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. The lies, the betrayal, the envelope. Then I saw it again, right there on the dining table where I'd left it last night. Her reaction frozen in my memory. Celeste collapsing, the color draining from her face as if her entire world had just folded in on itself. It wasn't the money that shocked her. It was the truth that came with it. When she fainted, I'd caught her before she hit the floor. Stewart stood by uselessly, hands twitching at his sides, stammering questions he didn't really want answers to. "What did you do to her?" he asked, voice shaking. I told him to call an ambulance, but Celeste came around before the sirens ever started. She blinked up at me from the couch, eyes unfocused, breath uneven. "Dad, what is this?" she whispered. Her fingers were still locked around the edge of the envelope. "Read it," I told her. Inside wasn't a check, it was a letter. The quiet rescues you pretended never happened. Every time you said, "I've got this, Dad," I wanted to believe you. But last week, you looked me in the eye and lied. Again. You canceled our trip for financial reasons while posting photos from a resort that costs more per night than my entire retirement mortgage. You didn't just take a vacation. You took trust and burned it for applause. She stopped reading then, staring blessing into the friends, and then using, responsible. Here, she stopped reading. Stewart swallowed hard, his Adam's apple jumping. I could tell he hadn't expected to be part of this fallout. Not like this. He started to say something, but I held up my hand. "Keep reading," I said quietly. Her eyes moved back to the page, voice trembling. "So here's what's going to happen, Celeste. I'm transferring $100,000, not to you, but to a trust in your name, locked until you complete 1 full year without taking a cent from anyone else, including your in-laws. No credit cards paid off by others, no family loans, no bailout dinners or fake emergencies. You'll live within what you earn, and you'll learn what I once had to. That self-respect costs more than any vacation. If you pass that test, the trust becomes yours, and you'll find something else waiting inside it. A share of the investment property you never knew I still owned. You'll have earned it, not begged for it." Folded the letter slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. "You're punishing me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. No, I said, I'm teaching you. That conversation was a month ago. Since then, I hadn't heard from her. Not directly. The silence used to sting. Now it just reminded me that growth requires distance. Until one afternoon, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, Celeste stood there. No makeup, hair tied back, her usual designer purse nowhere in sight. She looked smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally. Her eyes searched mine like a child who'd just found her way home after being lost for too long. "Dad," she said softly, "can I come in?" I nodded. She stepped inside, taking in the quiet living room. The same Hawaiian shirt still folded neatly in the corner, tags reattached but never returned. "I quit my job," she said suddenly, "not because of you. Because I reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I recognized my handwriting immediately, the trust documentation I'd mailed to the bank. "I haven't touched it," she said. "I don't want it. Not yet." "Why?" I asked. "Because I'm not done earning it." I felt something inside me loosen, a knot I didn't realize I'd been carrying for decades. My daughter, the same one who once measured worth in likes and luxury, was sitting here, stripped of pretense, speaking the language I'd waited my whole life to hear. "Celeste," I said, "you don't have to punish yourself." "I'm not," she replied. "I'm growing. You were right. Money wasn't what I needed. You were." A week later, she invited me for coffee. Nothing fancy. A small cafe near the edge of downtown, mismatched tables and burnt espresso smell. She looked lighter, freer. We talked about everything: work, childhood, even Hawaii. "I still can't believe you booked everything yourself," she said, smiling faintly. "Old habits," I said. "Maybe we could try again," she offered. "Not now, someday. Just you and me. No lies this time." "I'd like that," I said. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Dad, what would have happened if I'd just taken the money? If I hadn't fainted and actually tried to cash that check?" I smiled. "You'd have found a cashier's check inside, for exactly $1. Shuffled for the first time in months, wiping tears from her eyes. "$1? Yup, to remind you that trust starts small." Her laughter faded, replaced by quiet understanding. "You know," she said, "I used to think you were hard on me, that you didn't understand what life costs now. But maybe you just understood what it's worth." Months passed. Celeste stayed true to her word. No requests, no handouts, no lies. She worked hard, saved, and slowly rebuilt her life. The in-laws, the same ones who'd paraded her around that Hawaiian resort, stopped calling once the money stopped flowing. Funny how loyalty dries up faster than champagne when the bottle's empty. Then one day my phone buzzed. A bank notification. "Trust account activity." I logged in. "Yes," I said. "Think of it as your new start. But don't sell it. Live there. Learn there." She started crying. "You really forgive me?" "Ah, already did," I said, "the moment you stopped lying." A year later, I stood on that Oregon beach, wind whipping through my gray hair. Celeste was there, barefoot in the sand, a little boy running beside her, my grandson. "Come on, Grandpa," he shouted, waving a tiny shovel. I smiled. "Give me a minute, buddy." Sexo looked over and grinned. He's obsessed with building sandcastles. "Good," I said. "They teach patience and humility. They always wash away." The tide rolled in, glinting under the setting sun. I thought about that envelope, that fainting moment, that single decision to teach rather than destroy. Revenge had seemed sweet once, but this was better. Immigration. This was redemption. Epilogue. A few weeks after our beach day, Celeste sent me a postcard, a photo of the very spot where she'd once lied to me, that Hawaiian resort. But the message on the back was short and pure. "Next time we go to Hawaii, I'll be the one paying for you. Line back, always. Silenced. C." Threads it to my fridge, right next to the faded receipt from that department store. The Hawaiian shirts were gone now, but the lesson and the love stayed. And that, I realized, was the real paradise all along.